Imagine a world where the improbable becomes reality, where distant nations are united by unimaginable destinies, and the stage of history is set for a drama that echoes through the corridors of power and survival. Today, we will unravel a saga that defies comprehension, an alliance as mysterious as it is explosive, which could redefine the future of a continent. Prepare to witness the unthinkable. North Korea has sent 700 commandos to protect Ibrahim Traoré. Subscribe in the channel so you don't miss any videos. In the heart of the Sahel, a region marked by centuries of conflict and neglect, a figure emerged who defied expectations and personified the fury of a nation in turmoil. Ibrahim Traoré, a leader whose humble origins and meteoric rise to power echoed the most epic African legends, carrying with him the weight of the hopes of a people exhausted by instability and exploitation, a young captain who, amid the chaos of a coup d'état, dared to promise sovereignty and dignity to a land that had long been stripped of both, becoming the epicenter of an international controversy and the catalyst for an unprecedented alliance. His presence, once confusing to the world, now consolidated itself as a geopolitical enigma, arousing both fear and admiration in equal measure. The chronic instability of the Sahel, a cauldron of ethnic tensions, climatic pressures, and the incessant shadow of terrorism, forged an environment where hopelessness often seemed the only constant, a complex scenario where external intervention became a double-edged sword, promising solutions while often deepening pre-existing wounds, shaping a continent where self-determination was a distant aspiration, constantly threatened by global powers and vested interests that subverted the autonomy of states, creating a power vacuum and a gap for the emergence of leaders who, out of desperation or conviction, sought new and dangerous routes for the survival of their nations. In this turmoil, Traoré represented the personification of an era of revolt. The continued failures of previous governments and the seeming indifference of the international community only made the situation worse, leaving the Burkinabe population at the mercy of violence and misery, while infrastructure crumbled and hopes slipped away like sand through one's fingers, fueling a sense of betrayal and abandonment that paved the way for the rise of a radical figure. Someone who promised to break with the status quo no matter the cost, as the people's patience had reached its limit and the search for a new path became a matter of life and death for the nation. Traoré, with his fiery rhetoric and undeniable charisma, quickly won the hearts of the disillusioned masses of Burkina Faso, promising a future free from the neo-colonial influence and endemic corruption that was corroding the foundations of the state, his voice resounding like thunder amid the complacent silence of the international community, echoing the aspirations for long-denied social and economic justice, transforming him into a symbol of resistance and an icon of African sovereignty for many, while for others, his dizzying rise raised concerns about the sustainability of his promises and the volatile nature of his newfound power, a complex figure who captured the essence of a people searching for their own voice. The profound despair of the population, exhausted by years of empty promises and incessant violence, transformed Traoré's figure into a beacon of hope, a leader who dared to challenge the impossible, as the reality of their lives was one of extreme poverty and constant threat, driving them to support anyone who offered a solution, no matter how unorthodox, as the weight of despair outweighed the fear of the unknown, and the belief in a better future became the only driving force amidst the darkness, making the captain a savior for many who saw in him the last chance for redemption. His bold stance of defiance against traditional powers in the West, particularly the former colonial metropolis, reverberated throughout the African continent, fueling the fire of Pan-Africanism and the quest for true independence, a direct affront to a global system that for decades kept the continent under its yoke, arousing both admiration and fury in halls of power around the world, forcing a reassessment of international relations and the geopolitics of the Sahel, where the patience of the people had reached its limit, and the demand for radical change became increasingly deafening, altering the global chessboard in unpredictable and irreversible ways, consolidating his image as a disruptive actor. Traoré's rhetoric against the former colonial power, France, touched a deep wound in the hearts of many Africans, who for decades had felt the invisible hand of neocolonialism, a discourse of emancipation that resonated across the continent, uniting previously scattered voices in a chorus of indignation against external interference and the exploitation of resources. This bold, yet risky stance cemented his image as a defender of African sovereignty, winning him support in unexpected places and intensifying pressure on Western powers to reassess their policies in the region, confronting them with the reality of a continent searching for its own voice. Internally, however, the young captain faced a maze of challenges, from the persistence of terrorist groups that destabilized vast portions of the territory to the fragility of state institutions and the distrust of sectors of the elite, each step of his journey punctuated by veiled threats and attempts at subversion, requiring constant vigilance and a capacity for political maneuver that tested the limits of his leadership, a heavy burden for such young shoulders, but one that he carried with fierce determination, convinced that Burkina Faso's survival depended on his unwavering will to break with the past, no matter how dangerous the path ahead might be. Growing desperation in the face of a relentless enemy and scant foreign aid led Traoré to consider previously unthinkable options, a frantic search for any ally who could offer the military and logistical support needed to stem the tide of violence, a search that led him down dark diplomatic paths and secret negotiations, where the lines between ideology and pragmatism became blurred, revealing the harsh reality that a nation's survival often demands moral sacrifices and alliances that defy conventional logic, a scenario where urgency outweighed prudence, pushing him to the brink of a historic decision that would shock the world, marking a point of no return in the country's trajectory. Murmurs of a possible strategic move, something radical and unprecedented, began to circulate in the corridors of power and in global intelligence circles, fueling speculation about which nation, as isolated as Burkina Faso, might offer a pact of military support, a partnership that, by its unusual nature, would raise alarm bells in Western and Asian capitals, suggesting that Traoré was willing to play the geopolitical game by his own rules, ignoring warnings and established conventions, in a bold display of self-determination that challenged the status quo, signaling that the Sahel's patience had run out, and that the quest for sovereignty would no longer recognize borders. The previously diffuse global geopolitical focus began to focus with increasing intensity on the Sahel, a region that suddenly found itself at the epicenter of a new Cold War, where old and new powers vied for influence and resources, and where Traoré's every move was dissected with a magnifying glass, becoming a thermometer of the growing tensions between different power blocs. A volatile stage where the fate of millions was at stake, and with each passing day, the pressure increased for nations to take sides, revealing the intrinsic interconnectedness of a world where no event, no matter how distant it may seem, remains isolated, echoing in hearts and minds on every continent. To the world, Traoré was a dual figure, a controversial leader whose legacy would be defined by the perspective of those who observed him. For some, a hero who dared to defy centuries of oppression and subordination, personifying the aspiration for a truly free and sovereign Africa. For others, a rising tyrant whose risky actions could plunge the region into an even deeper abyss of instability and violence. A polarizing figure who embodied the complexity of transitions of power in a world in constant redefinition, leaving a trail of uncertainty and a deep division of opinion about his true purpose and the lasting impact of his decisions. Despite all his bravado and the popular fervor that surrounded him, the underlying vulnerability of Traoré and his nation was undeniable, a structural fragility that called for robust external protection, something that his own military resources could not effectively provide, especially against the persistent threats of armed groups and the potential interference of regional and international actors, exposing the pressing need for a military alliance that could guarantee his survival and the stability of Burkina Faso, a need that paved the way for a decision that would shake the foundations of global diplomacy, transforming the unthinkable into a painful reality. The alliance's shock was a thunderclap in the blue sky, an announcement that resounded throughout the halls of power and on international news channels, defying all established geopolitical logic and provoking a wave of disbelief and confusion, because who would have imagined that Pyongyang, such a reclusive and sanctioned nation, would reach out to a rising African leader, openly defying international norms and the global order, making the news an unprecedented event, an earthquake in Diplomatic relations that redefined expectations and forced a complete reassessment of security strategies and military alliances around the world, leaving analysts and political leaders in a state of bewilderment and alarm. The question echoed in every capital: why North Korea? An analysis of the motivations revealed a complex web of mutual interests, where ideology was perhaps secondary to the pragmatic search for resources and influence. For Pyongyang, the opportunity to break its diplomatic and financial isolation, to find a new client for its arms industry and to project power in a strategic and forgotten region was irresistible, a chance to demonstrate its capacity to operate on a global scale, defying the economic and military siege imposed by the great powers, while at the same time guaranteeing a flow of goods and raw materials vital to its own survival. Pyongyang's history is marked by unconventional partnerships and a robust, if controversial, military export industry, a nation that, under the cloak of secrecy, built a global network of clients and allies, often in unstable regions marginalized by the international system, providing military expertise and equipment to regimes under sanctions or in conflict. Cementing its reputation as a solution provider for nations seeking autonomy and power, a track record that, although little publicized, provided a disturbing precedent for the alliance with Burkina Faso, revealing a pattern of behavior that challenged established norms and disrupted the global order. North Korea's desperation for foreign exchange and natural resources, strangled by decades of sanctions and economic isolation, made Burkina Faso's proposal irresistible, an unexpected avenue for circumventing Western restrictions, as exchanging military expertise for access to valuable minerals or other strategic commodities offered a lifeline for Pyongyang's ailing economy, turning a necessity into a geopolitical opportunity, and underscoring a regime's determination to find ways to survive and thrive even under the most intense international pressure, redefining its own terms of global engagement. The mutual benefits were clear and alarming: natural resources and perhaps even a strategic Atlantic port for North Korea in exchange for cutting-edge military security and tactical expertise for Burkina Faso, a trade that, while frightening to the West, represented a pragmatic solution for both parties. North Korea, hungry for ways to circumvent sanctions, and Burkina Faso, desperate for protection from insurgency and instability, found themselves at a point of convergence of interests, a symbiosis of needs that defied convention and would redefine the lines of geopolitical alliances, setting a dangerous precedent on the international stage. Secret negotiations, shrouded in mystery and conducted through obscure diplomatic channels, were the crucible in which this unthinkable alliance was forged, far from the prying eyes of the press and Western intelligence agencies. Clandestine meetings in neutral locations where emissaries from both sides drew up the contours of a game-changing pact. Each word weighted with the fate of nations and the potential disruption of the global order, a high-stakes chess game where discretion was the most valuable currency and trust a luxury few could afford, culminating in an agreement that, if revealed, would explode like a bomb on the geopolitical scene. The degree of secrecy and logistical complexity of carrying out such negotiations indicated the participation of underground networks and discreet intermediaries, operating in the shadows of international diplomacy, as the sensitivity of the alliance required that each step be carefully concealed, to avoid early detection by opposing powers. And the very audacity of approaching Pyongyang for a military agreement demonstrated how desperate and determined Traoré was in his search for support. Willing to cross ideological and moral boundaries to ensure the survival of his nation, making the act of negotiation itself a feat of courage and cunning. The geopolitical implications for both regions were vast and of as yet incalculable consequences. For the Sahel, the presence of a North Korean military force meant an escalation of tension and a direct challenge to the former colonial powers. For North Korea, it represented a bold advance in its foreign policy, a demonstration of its ability to project power beyond its traditional borders, creating new fault lines on the global map, where the influence of traditional powers would be tested by a new and unexpected actor, altering the balance of power and adding a layer of complexity to already intricate regional conflicts. The nature of this alliance, whether ideological or purely pragmatic, was the subject of intense debate. Some saw it as a manifestation of solidarity between anti-imperialist states, united in their opposition to Western hegemony. Others saw it as a purely mercantile transaction, where the need for survival trumped any idealism. A question of supply and demand in the black market of international security. But regardless of the motivation, the fact was that North Korea, a pariah state for most, had found an unlikely partner in an African nation seeking sovereignty, underlining the complexity of international relations in a multipolar world. The reputation of the North Korean Commandos, forged through decades of rigorous training and iron discipline, preceded their arrival, painting a picture of relentless, loyal, and highly effective warriors, trained in unconventional warfare tactics and high-risk security operations, an elite force, feared for their stealth and lethality, whose intensive training prepared them to operate under the most adverse conditions, making them the ideal choice to protect a leader in constant danger. Their arrival in the Sahel was a testament to the seriousness of Pyongyang's commitment, and a clear message that Traoré's security was now a top priority. The intensive training and political indoctrination to which the commandos undergo in Pyongyang transforms them into instruments of unquestionable loyalty to the regime, making them ideal for highly sensitive missions such as protecting a foreign leader, as their loyalty would not be compromised by external influences or personal security considerations, ensuring that the mission of protecting Traoré would be carried out with unwavering dedication and ruthless precision, making them an unparalleled security force in such a volatile environment, and a symbol of Pyongyang's ability to fulfill its agreements. The scale of this military deployment, 700 commandos from such a distant and isolated nation, was unprecedented and shocking, not only in number but in the logistical and diplomatic audacity it entailed, a considerable force capable of significantly altering the balance of power on the ground, and which demonstrated the depth of Pyongyang's involvement and the urgency of the Traoré situation, transforming Burkina Faso into a new focal point of international attention and a test of the resilience of the global security system, showing that even the most bizarre alliances could materialize in the face of extreme geopolitical necessity. The global reaction was one of astonishment and skepticism, with many questioning the veracity of the information and the sustainability of such a pact, an alliance that challenged decades of diplomacy and foreign policy, generating immediate condemnation from Western nations and international organizations, who saw the move as a dangerous escalation of tensions and a blatant disregard for UN sanctions. However, despite the indignation, the reality was that North Korea had inserted itself into the heart of Africa, forcing the world to confront a new and complex geopolitical reality, the consequences of which were yet to unfold. The clandestine arrival of the North Korean commandos, under the veil of night and the utmost secrecy, marked the beginning of a new era for Burkina Faso, their stealthy silhouettes landing on remote airstrips, carrying with them not only weapons and equipment, but also the promise of unprecedented security for leader Traoré, an operation meticulously planned to avoid detection and international alarm, transforming the Sahel landscape into a new chessboard for the great powers, which now watched with watchful eyes every move in the region, aware that the power dynamics had irreversibly changed. Despite initial efforts to keep the operation secret, the presence of such a distinguished foreign military force could not remain hidden for long, and the gradual revelation of its arrival, through leaks and careful observation, provoked a global uproar, forcing the Burkina Faso authorities to acknowledge the presence of the commandos while downplaying the scale and nature of their mission. But the truth quickly spread, fueling controversy and elevating North Korea to a central role in a new and unexpected geopolitical drama, challenging the international community to react to this audacious display of power. The physical and cultural shock of deploying these warriors trained for another climate and culture was palpable. Men accustomed to the harsh winters of the Korean peninsula now immersed in the scorching heat and red dust of the Sahel, their rigid military routines in stark contrast to the local rhythm of life, generating a mixture of curiosity, apprehension and admiration among the Burkinabe population as the strangers in camouflage uniforms became an unfamiliar part of the landscape, demonstrating the adaptability and iron discipline that made them so formidable, but also questioning the long-term sustainability of such a presence. The logistics behind such a complex operation, which involved transporting hundreds of men and tons of equipment across vast distances while avoiding the radar of Western powers, was a feat in itself, requiring the coordination of secret air and sea routes, the use of disguised aircraft, and the collaboration of intermediaries who ensured total discretion, making the transport of the Commandos a testament to Pyongyang's ability to operate in second lines, and a demonstration of the depth of its commitment to the newly formed alliance. Its operational setup was a case study in efficiency and paranoia, with security bases erected with military precision, camouflaged command posts and impregnable defense perimeters, every detail planned to ensure maximum protection for President Traoré, with the implementation of security protocols that would be the envy of any cutting-edge intelligence agency. Using advanced surveillance technology and counterintelligence tactics, transforming the presidential palace and its surroundings into an impenetrable fortress, demonstrating the seriousness with which Pyongyang took the mission and the life of the Burkinabe leader. The immediate impact on Traoré's security was undeniable, with a notable decrease in threats and the intensification of intelligence and counterintelligence operations around him, his presence reinforced by an elite guard that operated with discretion and lethality, raising the level of protection to levels never seen before, making the security circle around the leader almost hermetic, transmitting a sense of invincibility and reinforcing his authority, both for his supporters and for his enemies, who now faced a much more formidable challenge, a wall of steel erected by distant hands. The adaptation of the North Korean commandos to the climate and environment of the Sahel, with its suffocating heat, sandstorms and tropical diseases, tested the limits of their endurance and training, but their discipline and resilience allowed them to overcome the challenges, demonstrating the ability to operate in extreme conditions, and the unwavering dedication to the mission, because for them, each difficulty was just another obstacle to be overcome in the name of duty and loyalty, reinforcing the image of relentless and adaptable warriors, ready to face any adversity in the name of their country and the alliance. The contrast between the Spartan discipline of the North Korean commandos and the vibrant, and sometimes chaotic environment of the Sahel was striking, their rigorous routines and unwavering focus on the mission contrasting with the liveliness of the local markets and the spontaneity of African life, creating a fascinating dichotomy that revealed the profound cultural difference between the two peoples, but also the universality of determination and the search for purpose, while the presence of these elite soldiers, so different in their ways, became a mirror of the complex and unexpected interconnections of the modern world. The reaction of the local population was multifaceted and complex, oscillating between fear of the unknown, curiosity about the newcomers, and a faint hope that their presence could finally bring the long-awaited peace and stability. Some saw them as protectors and liberators, others as a new form of colonization, but everyone watched closely, trying to decipher the purpose of these silent warriors and the impact that their arrival would have on their daily lives, an entire nation breathing the heavy air of uncertainty, awaiting the developments of an alliance that promised to change everything. The challenges of integrating two such distinct military doctrines, forged in completely different geographical and historical realities, were immense. North Korea, with its total defense approach and uncompromising discipline, and Burkina Faso, with its developing armed forces adapted to local realities, required a monumental effort of coordination and adaptation. However, the apparent fluidity of this integration, however unlikely it may have seemed, suggested a level of pragmatism and determination that overcame cultural and strategic barriers, demonstrating the urgency of the mission and the willingness of both parties to make the partnership work, whatever the cost. The integration of the commandos with local security forces, while complex, revealed a surprising level of synergy, with North Korea sharing surveillance and counterinsurgency tactics, and Burkina Faso offering invaluable knowledge of the terrain and nuances of local culture, an exchange of expertise that strengthened both parties and improved the effectiveness of joint operations, transforming what had seemed an unlikely partnership into a surprisingly functional military collaboration, and a model of South-South cooperation that defied Western expectations. The first signs of increased security were visible, with a drop in insurgent attacks in areas under the direct protection of the commandos and a sense of greater stability in urban centers. But the first tensions were also emerging, whispers of discontent among local officials and the fear that Burkina Faso's sovereignty was being compromised by the foreign presence. A delicate balance between the need for protection and the maintenance of national autonomy, a dilemma that became increasingly pressing as the presence of the Commandos consolidated, and the implications of their permanence became more evident. The symbolic weight of the North Korean presence in Ouagadougou was immense, transforming Burkina Faso's capital into a beacon of a bold new form of global diplomacy and security, a demonstration that even the most isolated and economically challenged nations could forge alliances that challenged the established order, sending a clear message to the world that the Sahel would no longer be a mere playing field for outside powers but an active actor in its own destiny, even if that meant partnerships that defied comprehension and sent chills through the hearts of the most powerful nations. International condemnation erupted like thunder, a symphony of outraged voices echoing from Washington to Brussels, from Geneva to Tokyo, with statements of repudiation and warnings about the dangerous implications of this unthinkable alliance. Since the presence of North Korean troops on African soil represented a direct affront to the UN sanctions regime and a dramatic escalation of geopolitical tensions, turning the Sahel into a powder keg ready to explode, while the international community, shocked and perplexed, debated the best strategies to contain what was seen as an unprecedented threat to global stability, generating a diplomatic crisis of epic proportions. The reactions of the Western powers and the former colonial masters were of contained and strategic fury, with France and the United States leading the chorus of criticism, fearing the erosion of their influence in the region and the opening of a dangerous precedent for other African nations that might seek partnerships with states considered pariahs. Their diplomats and strategists met in emergency sessions, seeking a coordinated response that could reverse the course of events, but Traoré's boldness, supported by Pyongyang, put them in a delicate position, where each move needed to be carefully weighed to avoid an even greater escalation. The United Nations, with its majestic and sometimes ineffective bureaucracy, found itself in an unprecedented dilemma, divided between the explicit condemnation of the alliance and the need to maintain some kind of dialogue to avoid an even greater conflict, with the UN Security Council becoming the stage for heated debates and resolutions that, at times, seemed more symbolic than effective. While global diplomacy struggled to navigate an unknown terrain, where the old rules no longer applied, and realpolitik assumed increasingly brutal contours, revealing the fragility of international institutions in the face of such audacious challenges. The African Union and ECOWAS, the main regional blocs, also faced a dilemma, as continental solidarity clashed with aversion to alliances with sanctioned states, dividing opinion between explicit condemnation and tacit understanding of the need for self-defense. A complex debate that exposed the internal fissures of African governance and the difficulty of imposing a united front in the face of such multifaceted challenges, with Burkina Faso's sovereignty clashing with broader regional security concerns, turning the alliance into a test of the continent's cohesion. The domino effect reverberated across West Africa and its neighboring states, raising fears of contamination and a new regional arms race, with nations such as Niger and Mali watching developments in Burkina Faso with apprehension, questioning the effectiveness of their own alliances and security strategies, fearing that Traoré's boldness could inspire other leaders to seek support in unexpected places, further destabilizing a region already marked by conflict and uncertainty. With each passing day, the shadow of North Korea loomed larger and larger over the African continent, redefining power relations. Internally, Burkina Faso lived in intriguing duality, with the alliance generating both a patriotic fervor, fueled by Traoré's rhetoric of sovereignty and self-determination, and a whisper of dissent among those who feared the long-term consequences of such a pact, the population divided between the hope of security and the fear of even greater isolation, while the Traoré government, strengthened by the presence of the Commandos, consolidated its power but remained aware of the need to balance internal expectations with external pressures, navigating a stormy sea of support and opposition, with the fate of the nation at stake. Traoré's consolidation of power, although strengthened by the North Korean presence, was accompanied by a subtle crackdown on internal dissent, with reinforced security measures and increased surveillance of critical voices, as the alliance, although offering external protection, required an internal unity that did not tolerate open questioning. transforming Burkina Faso's political environment into a more restrictive space, where freedom of expression was sacrificed in the name of stability and loyalty to the new regime, a heavy price paid for the newly acquired security and sovereignty. The military and intelligence implications for regional security were alarming, with Western and African intelligence agencies working tirelessly to monitor the North Korean presence, decipher their intentions and assess the threat they posed, while the movement of troops and equipment in the region increased, indicating an escalation of tensions and the risk of direct or proxy military confrontations, transforming the Sahel into a new battlefield for a covert Cold War, where intelligence and counterintelligence became the most powerful weapons, and knowledge, the key to survival in such a volatile scenario. The economic consequences were imminent and severe, with the threat of additional sanctions and financial isolation hanging over Burkina Faso, while international trading partners and investors reconsidered their ties with the country, fearing repercussions and significant losses, an uncertain future where the local economy could be severely affected, compromising the well-being of the population. A harsh reality that, although predictable, was a price that Traoré seemed willing to pay for. Sovereignty and protection, demonstrating that, for him, national dignity outweighed any financial cost, even if it implied sacrifices for his people. The potential for proxy conflicts or further escalation of regional instability was a constant concern, with the possibility of Western and African powers supporting opposition groups or militias to undermine the alliance between Traoré and Pyongyang, transforming the Sahel into a stage for a secret and devastating war, where innocent lives would be taken in the name of geopolitical interests, increasing the uncertainty and volatility of an already fragile region. And with each passing day, the shadow of war grew denser, looming over the horizons of a land that longed for peace but found itself dragged into an endless turmoil. Concerns about human rights and the repressive nature of the North Korean regime raised alarms among international organizations, which feared that the presence of the Commandos could lead to a hardening of internal policies in Burkina Faso and a reduction in civil liberties, creating a moral dilemma for the global community, which was forced to weigh national sovereignty against the protection of fundamental rights. A complex tangle of ethics and realpolitik that made intervention even more delicate and the consequences even more unpredictable. The narrative battle was as fierce as the military one, with North Korea and Burkina Faso defending the alliance as an act of sovereignty and self-determination, a legitimate response to external interference and international neglect, while the West denounced the pact as an irresponsible partnership with a rogue state, a dangerous precedent that undermined global security and the rules-based order. Each side seeking to shape public perception and win hearts and minds in a war of words that echoed across social media and news channels, demonstrating that in the modern world, truth was often a matter of perspective and power. The risks and stakes for all involved were incalculable, for Traoré, his political survival and that of his regime, for Pyongyang, the chance to break its isolation and redefine its role on the global stage, for the Sahel, the future of millions of people, and for the great powers, the maintenance of their hegemony and the stability of a world order that seemed to be disintegrating before their eyes. Each move was a step towards an uncertain future, where the unthinkable became the new normal. And the rules of the game were rewritten at every moment, in an unprecedented geopolitical drama. The long-term impact on Traoré's government and the future of Burkina Faso would be monumental and indelible, the alliance with North Korea cementing his power but also tying the fate of his nation to a volatile and isolated partner, shaping the country's identity for decades, influencing its domestic and foreign policies, and determining its position on the global stage, a decision that, although taken in a moment of desperation and a quest for sovereignty, would carry with it the weight of unpredictable consequences, forever altering the trajectory of a nation and its people. For better or worse, time would tell. North Korea's role in global security, once confined to its peninsula and a few specific allies, has expanded in surprising ways, demonstrating its ability to project power and influence far and wide, challenging perceptions of its isolation and redefining its stature as an unpredictable but potentially powerful geopolitical actor. Its alliance with Burkina Faso serving as a case study for future partnerships and a sign that Pyongyang is willing to take calculated risks to achieve its goals. transforming it into a new and disturbing player in the complex global chess game. The redefinition of international alliances and spheres of influence was palpable. With the emergence of new blocs and the erosion of old hegemonies, the world moving towards a complex and dangerous multipolarity, where nations like Burkina Faso, previously considered marginalized, gained strategic relevance by forging pacts with unconventional actors, altering the dynamics of power and creating a new geopolitical map, where lines became more fluid and loyalties more volatile, signaling the end of an era and the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter in the history of international relations. The lessons learned from this saga were profound and thought-provoking, revealing the harsh reality that desperate nations, pressed by instability and neglect, can be driven to seek unconventional solutions and risky partnerships to ensure their survival, showing that isolation and indifference from the international community can push fragile states into the arms of less orthodox actors. A grim reminder that global stability depends on a system that meets the needs of all, not just the privileged few, and underscoring the urgency of a more equitable and comprehensive approach. The potential for similar alliances to emerge in other corners of the globe was a real concern, with nations in similar situations watching the Burkina Faso experiment closely, considering the possibility of replicating the partnership model with North Korea or other rogue states, creating a network of alternative alliances that would challenge the existing world order, further fragmenting global governance and making the international system more unpredictable and dangerous, a reality that forced established powers to rethink their strategies and seek new forms of engagement to avoid a proliferation of undesirable pacts. The fate of the 700 North Korean commandos, the success or failure of their mission, would be a crucial factor in the final assessment of this alliance, their permanence and effectiveness determining the durability of the pact and Pyongyang's credibility as a security provider. But regardless of the final outcome, their presence in the Sahel had already left an indelible mark on history, transforming them into symbols of a bold new form of power projection, and the legacy of their mission, whether of triumph or tragedy, would echo for decades, influencing the fate of nations and the dynamics of power in an ever-changing world. Ideological influence, although secondary to initial pragmatic interests, could subtly infiltrate Burkina Faso's institutions, shaping political discourse and governance practices, as proximity to a totalitarian and autocratic state could influence the direction of the Traoré regime, leading to a greater centralization of power and a move away from democratic principles. An insidious side effect of the alliance that, in the long run, could redefine the political nature of Burkina Faso, making it more aligned with authoritarian governance models. The human cost of this risky geopolitical gamble, the lives lost in conflict, the families displaced, and the emotional scars of a nation at war, would be a burden to be borne for generations, a grim reminder that behind grand strategies and political calculations lie human beings whose lives are irrevocably altered by decisions made in distant halls of power, a silent cry that echoed across the Sahel, and that should serve as a warning to those who seek glory and power at the expense of the well-being of their peoples, a reminder that peace and stability are precious and fragile goods. The historical significance of this unprecedented event would be studied by historians and analysts for decades, marking a turning point in international relations and 21st-century geopolitics, the alliance between North Korea and Burkina Faso becoming a case study in how necessity and desperation can rewrite the rules of the global game, and how peripheral nations can become central actors in dramas of power, a story that would echo as a cautionary tale or an inspiration, depending on the perspective of the teller, but one that would never be forgotten in the annals of history. Lingering questions and unresolved tensions would continue to loom over the Sahel and the global scene, with the North Korean presence in Burkina Faso serving as a catalyst for new conflicts, for continued destabilization of the region, or for an unexpected reconfiguration of alliances, an uncertain future where peace and stability were constantly challenged by new threats and ever-changing power dynamics. A scenario where vigilance and resilience would be the only guarantees in an increasingly complex and unpredictable world, with the shadow of North Korea looming over African skies. The ramifications for food security and humanitarian assistance in the region would be severe, as instability and new sanctions could worsen the already precarious situation of the population, hindering access to food, medicine, and essential aid, turning the conflict into a humanitarian crisis of even greater proportions, and a grim reminder that behind geopolitical calculations, the lives and suffering of the most vulnerable people are often the most affected, crying out for attention and support that the world is sometimes hesitant to provide. How Traoré and his nation would navigate this complex web of alliances and adversities would define his legacy, and the fate of Burkina Faso, for success in establishing lasting sovereignty, would depend not just on military strength but on the ability to build a resilient economy and a cohesive society, a monumental challenge that would require wisdom, courage, and a long-term vision, with the world watching closely, wondering whether this bold gamble would bring redemption or an even deeper abyss of instability. The dawn of a new geopolitical landscape, shaped by the shadows of this extraordinary and unthinkable alliance, was inevitable, where old certainties would fade and new realities would consolidate, transforming the map of power and influence into a mosaic of complexity and uncertainty. With North Korea and Burkina Faso emerging as protagonists of a chapter that redefined international relations and defied expectations, marking a new and audacious step in the search for sovereignty and security. In a world in constant mutation, where the impossible became the new norm, and the future, a book to be written with ink of audacity. If this journey into the secrets of geopolitics and human destiny resonated with you, if the complex plot of this unthinkable alliance sparked your curiosity and deepened your understanding of the world, then don't miss the opportunity to be part of our community. Subscribe to the channel to continue exploring with us the narratives that shape our present and future. Leave a like to show us that you value the depth and analysis we deliver, and above all, share your thoughts and impressions in the comments below. Your engagement is the fuel that drives us to unravel more mysteries and bring you more stories that truly matter. Together, we will continue to explore the unexplored,